think Nehemiah works out of these broader, more inclusive perspectives as he sets out on his task of rebuilding the city of Jerusalem. Having gained the status of cupbearer to the Persian king, Nehemiah has to some extent become assimilated and attained status in exile, and yet he's maintained his religious identity and connections to his people's ancestral home. We also know from the book of Ezra that the reconstruction of the temple, the center of the Israelites' religious life, was already underway. And yet the city itself remained in ruins, which ultimately threatened the continuation of religious practices. Even in Jerusalem, religious life could not be fully revived if the city in which it was located lay in ruins and was under threat from its enemies. This brings me to the first Nehemiah principle. The well-being of the church is vitally connected to the well-being of the community in which it is embedded. A church cannot truly be revived if the communities surrounding it remain broken and in disrepair. The two are by design organically intertwined. Thus, despite being a third or fourth generation exile, Nehemiah is moved to action when he hears the news of Jerusalem's perilous fate from his brother. He has a vision, and he becomes a catalyst in mobilizing the people of Jerusalem to come together in solving their most pressing problem, which in their case, for Jerusalem, the most pressing problem was the broken wall. This brings us to the second principle. Most urban development and organizing projects start with a small group of people with a shared vision and common set of values. They go out and draw other people in by giving them a sense that change is possible. Do we as a church know what the most pressing problems in the community in which we worship? The first several times I read this text, I skipped over those long, unpronounceable lists of families who had rebuilt the wall. And only later did I come to realize that all those names were there for a purpose. They let the reader know that the whole community had been mobilized to rebuild the wall. Ultimately, the rebuilding was no longer just Nehemiah's vision, but he had inspired everyone else to work. Because no doubt they shared his desire to rebuild, but did not know how or lacked access to the resources that Nehemiah had brought with him. Here, we find a third principle, which is that ultimately everyone must become committed to the task of community revitalization. Even though, just as different families work on different sections of the wall, each person will take on a different task. But the effort must be central to the life of the worshiping community. I think it's important to note that Israel does not build its city on its own. Because of the relationship that Nehemiah had with the king of Persia, he was able to secure outside assistance. He appeals to the king, who places the resources of his government at the disposal of Nehemiah and the people of Jerusalem. Herein, we can find a fourth principle, which is that urban development cannot be done by churches alone, but churches can initiate a vision to rebuild. Churches alone are too small, too weak, just as were the Israelites. But like Nehemiah, they can build relationships with others, including people of other religious traditions, people with resources and power, who embrace the